On the morning of September 21st, 1976, Orlando Letelier was driving his blue Chevrolet Chevelle from his home in Bethesda, Maryland, to his office in Washington, D.C. In years prior, Letelier had served as Chile's foreign minister under socialist President Salvador Allende, but was imprisoned following a U.S.-supported coup in 1973. After some diplomatic efforts led by Venezuela, Letelier was released and made his way to the U.S., where he took a job at the Left-Wing Institute of Policy Studies. This morning, his co-worker, Letelier-Moffitt, is riding in the passenger seat, and her husband Michael is in the back. The couple's car was in the garage, so Letelier had offered them a chance to carpool on his drive into the city. Letelier had also offered his assistant, Juan Gabriel Valdez, a ride as well, but he had declined as his wife was going to the store and he needed someone to watch the kids while she was out. According to Valdez, the two of them had been receiving threats at their office, but Letelier was unperturbed, quipping, "They would never dare to attack me in Washington." As the car rounded Sheridan Circle in the heart of Embassy Row, an explosion ripped through the front seat, striking Letelier and Letelier-Moffitt. The car lurched out of control and smashed into a Volkswagen Beetle parked in front of the Irish embassy. By all accounts, the scene was brutal. Letelier's legs were blown off at the knees, and one of his feet lay in the road. Michael Moffitt, relatively unharmed in the back seat, managed to make his way out of the burning car through the back window. He was relieved to see his wife stumble out of the front passenger seat and, thinking she too was relatively unharmed, ran to save Orlando, shouting, "Assassins! Fascists!" as he tried to drag Letelier out of the car. But it was too late. Letelier quickly lost consciousness and passed away within minutes. Michael returned to check on his wife and saw blood on her. She couldn't breathe. A piece of shrapnel had pierced her neck. Despite help arriving within minutes and Ronnie being rushed to the hospital, she would die just half an hour later, having drowned in her own blood. She was just 25 years old. The brazen attack in the middle of one of the most high-security neighborhoods in the U.S. Capitol shocked even those familiar with the Chilean regime, its campaign of terror targeting dissidents around the world, and its vendetta against Letelier. Suspicion immediately fell on Pinochet's secret police, the Directorate of National Intelligence, or DINA. For the U.S. government, which had supported Pinochet's coup against Allende under the Nixon administration, the assassination was treated as something of an awkward inconvenience. The Carter administration, taking office a few months after the attack, imposed some mild sanctions despite calls within the State Department for a much stiffer response and a classified CIA report that Pinochet had personally ordered the attack on U.S. soil. After 2 years of investigation, the FBI uncovered a person of interest. They had a photo which they leaked to the public despite little evidence on hand, and the gamble paid off. The photo was of Michael Townley, an Iowa-born American who had lived periodically in Chile throughout his life and was by then living in Santiago. The U.S. Embassy made contact with Townley, who, possibly somewhat naively, agreed to meet with them. Pinochet's government was unconcerned with Townley, who had no official position in Chile and was a convenient scapegoat. However, after he was allowed to be extradited to the U.S. for the investigation, Townley confessed and named two members of DINA, General Manuel Contreras and Colonel Pedro Espinosa, as having given him the orders to kill Letelier. He further implicated 5 others, a group of right-wing Cuban acquaintances who had helped surveil Letelier, drive Townley out to plant the bomb on Letelier's car, and the morning of the assassination flipped the switch to detonate the bomb. Townley was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison for the assassination, but was released after just 5 due to time already served and his cooperation with authorities. After the end of Pinochet's rule in 1990, the DINA officials who had ordered Townley to assassinate Letelier were both convicted of their involvement and sentenced to 6 and 7 years in prison. Meanwhile, Letelier's assistant at the time of his assassination, Juan Gabriel Valdez, the men that he had offered a ride to the morning of his death, would go on to serve as Chile's ambassador to the United Nations in the early 2000s and twice serve as Chile's ambassador to the United States, where he would commute down the very same road his boss had all those years ago. With the benefit of hindsight, it's easy to be critical of the American response to the attack. I don't think there's much to justify the Carter administration's milquetoast reaction. At the same time, the assassination of Orlando Letelier and Letelier-Moffitt shows us just how different the mindset was during that part of the Cold War. Letelier sought refuge in the United States despite its backing of the government that wanted his head. Letelier was able to keep a high profile as a critic of the Pinochet regime, And it was this tension and hypocrisy between the freedom of speech the U.S. had fostered domestically and the authoritarianism it had fostered abroad that the deaths of Letelier and Moffitt exposed for all to see. We would do well to remember that the more our governments choose to turn their back on abuses abroad, the more likely they are to foster those kinds of abuses at home as well as these sorts of attacks. And that's as true in 2025 as it was in 1976.